Welcome to the Orlando Sentinel's editorial board interview with State House District 38 Democratic candidate Sarah Henry of Altamont Springs, who is challenging State Rep David Smith. He's a Winter Springs Republican, and this is what most certainly is one of the most expensive, if not the most expensive, state house race in Florida for this cycle. The seat covers southwestern Seminole County, and it represents a rematch between Ms. Henry, who is a project manager for a healthcare company with an extensive background in nonprofits, and Representative Smith, who retired from the Marine Corps with the rank of colonel and has spent the last 10 years as a consultant in training and simulation. We reached out to Representative Smith, who is seeking his fourth term in the House, when we were scheduling this interview, but we didn't hear back from him. Voters can research his record at myfloridahouse.com and view his website at electsmith28.com. Yes, that is a 28. Also, Ms. Henry's website is available as well, Sarah for Florida. I'm going to spell it out. SARAHFORFL.com. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get started with the first question. Florida has had 3+ years of record spending, thanks in large part to a massive infusion of federal COVID money. Over the next 2 years, however, the state economist Amy Baker says that Florida could go from a $2 billion surplus to a $2.9 billion shortfall. Yeah. If you are elected, what would you advise lawmakers to do in 2025 to deal with that reality?
Yeah, well, first, thank you so much for having me, and really looking forward to the opportunity to participate with you all and share more about myself and this race with the voters of Seminole County and District 38. I think when it comes to conversations around budget and spending, this is actually something I use a lot with, something I talk about a lot with voters on the doors, because a lot of folks wonder, what their state legislator does and sort of what they're responsible for, and being able to sort of tie that back to the budget and to say, these are the kind of communities and this is how spending and funding is determined, is really such a critical piece of the conversation with the voters on the doors. I think when it comes to concerns around the potential shortfalls, there's a lot of opportunities to increase state revenue to hopefully make up for some of the difference there. And I think one potential path is the passage of Amendment 3. When we look at opportunities to improve revenue on a pretty wide scale, we can look at states that have legalized marijuana and see that there is a pretty dramatic uptick in available resources. So I think that is one kind of clear path that the legislature should absolutely be exploring, especially as part of their responsibility to, manage the implementation of the amendment if and when it passes. And then when it comes to spending, I think, when we look at budgets, I think often those conversations are very nuanced, very wonky, very policy driven. And for me, I really believe that a budget is an expression of how we care for our neighbors. What programs are we going to fund, and how are we investing in our communities? And so I think just leading with a conversation around, is this a line item that is going to bring value to the people that we love, to our neighbors? Is this going to build a better tomorrow than we have today? I think is kind of the key guiding question that we as legislators should be asking, because that's what folks put us in Tallahassee to do.
Thank you. And just to drill down a little bit more on one specific budget issue, ever since I've been following the legislature, and I suspect ever since the beginning of time, state funding has been used to support local priorities, septic to sewer projects, mental health programs, arts and culture programs. This year, hundreds of millions of dollars in local projects were slashed. most notably Governor DeSantis vetoing the entire cultural grant budget. Do you feel the state should be helping with those local projects, which are sometimes referred to as pork?
Yeah, I absolutely think that it is a legislator's responsibility to bring money home for the programs that a community desires and in many cases needs. I think we're seeing some challenges there in District 38 when we look at some of our infrastructure challenges. We're seeing line items be slashed and in many cases not even make it to the final budget. There's a line item for funding for the only full service homeless shelter in Seminole County that did not make it to the final budget. Even our arts and cultural projects are such critical elements of our communities. And certainly I could not get through the day without television and music and the art on my walls and the walls of our office. And I know that so many Floridians feel the same way. And so I think to refer to some of these critical, necessary projects as pork and just sort of dismiss them out of hand, it's a mistake. And it's a disservice to our community. Certainly a new water treatment plant is a desperate community need, not a frivolous expenditure.
Thank you. I have another question. Do you see a path for Florida to expand Medicaid to cover low-income working families? And what strategy would you consider to be most effective in that realm?
Yeah, I absolutely see a path. I think that there is such a need for increased coverage for our low-income communities. And we know that there's a lot of economic benefits that come along with expanded Medicaid. Folks are more likely to go to the doctor. Folks are more likely to receive treatment. We see that doctors are often more appropriately compensated, but also when we have a healthy workforce and folks who are able to participate in our communities, in our economy, it's a massive economic benefit. And so I think that kind of making that argument is a strategy I would want to see the Democrats and not just Democrats. Expanding Medicaid is often a bipartisan priority, especially when we look at other states that have done it. I would want to see our leaders kind of involve all of the benefits of that conversation. It's not just that our communities would be healthier and have access to the services they need, which of course is an incredible inherent benefit in expanding that program, but also there's such a significant economic advantage to having a healthy workforce, folks who are able to wake up in the morning and do what they need to do to participate in their communities, to join the PTA, to coach the soccer team. There's just so many benefits to having folks who are equipped to wake up and enjoy a full life every day. And I think to continue to decline those services is, frankly, it's a little bit embarrassing on a national level because it is just so straightforward.
Thank you. Wanted to get into another sort of segment of the budget. Would you be willing to support or file legislation that would give counties greater discretion in the use of tourist development taxes? And what would be your strategy to get such a TDT bill through committees?
Yeah, to be entirely honest with you, in Seminole County, while we are in Central Florida and do cover, many folks who work in the tourism space, our key economic driver is our public schools. And unlike much of Central Florida, we do not have that kind of drive from the tourism industry that really buoys our kind of local economies. Folks move to Seminole County with their families or in preparation to raise a family to take advantage of the public school system that has been sort of built and supported by incredible local champions, including many members of the Seminole County School Board. So I think in the world of tourism development taxes, I'm more inclined to learn from the leaders in the legislature who do have sort of more of a day-to-day hands-on conversations with the tourism industry and would be more inclined to sort of learn from leaders in that space before taking an official position. And, each legislator only gets so many bill slots. And so to say that I would want to use one on an issue that is not a key issue for my community, I would want to leave that to folks who do manage those issues day to day.
Well, actually, you kind of walked right into the next question, which is Florida's education budget is being hit somewhat significantly and possibly uncontrollably by a drain for private school vouchers. It is also going to be a big challenge again in the coming couple of years with the federal dollars drying up and going away to fund what is the biggest portion of the state budget. One of the ways lawmakers have dealt with this in the past, besides just underfunding schools, is to raise local millage rates and call that an increase in education funding. What path do you see forward if you were to say how education would be funded in Florida over the next couple of years? How would you balance those needs and make sure that schools are adequately funded as the Constitution requires?
Yeah, I absolutely believe parents have the right to send their child to a private school if they don't want to take advantage of, both Seminole County's exceptional public education, but public education across the state. What I disagree with is the idea that it is somehow the state government and the average Floridian taxpayer's responsibility to subsidize that choice. This is sort of going back to the point I made earlier around our budgets being a conversation about who we care about and what we love in our communities. We're making a choice to subsidize private education that is not available to the vast majority of Floridians and their kids. And we're making a choice to do that at the taxpayer's expense. I think it's a disservice to the taxpayer, frankly, because we all benefit from a strong, educated community. And I think it's a disservice to the kids who aren't able to access high quality private education because many of those schools are not required to follow the same standards that public schools are required to follow. Those schools can discriminate on who they're going to accept, on how they're going to allow, IEPs, for example, to be administered in the classroom. And so we're essentially paying into a program that doesn't benefit the community as a whole and instead largely supports, and we know now that the program has been implemented, largely supports students who already were attending these schools. These vouchers are sold to taxpayers as a way to increase opportunity and access for every student, and that's not what's happening. They're being used as coupons for students and families who are already accessing that expensive education. And now we're subsidizing the schools they were already attending with this coupon that we are paying for out of pocket. And I think it's a disservice to our students. It's a disservice to our families. It's a disservice to our public schools who have worked exceptionally hard to build incredible learning environments here in Seminole County and are now having the rug kind of pulled out from under them.
Thanks. Starting a couple months ago, through the excellent work of our team and other reporters around the state, the governor's office was revealed to be working with the Department of Environmental Protection to build lodges, golf courses, pickleball courts, disc golf courses in several parks. Some of which made it into a final plan, some of which were apparently waiting in the wings, with little public notice or study. And only the public outcry seemed to scuttle this plan. What should the legislature do to make sure this does not happen again?
Yeah, first of all, I really want to commend the bipartisan public outcry that did lead to sort of the reversal of this plan. I think it's important to note that the governor seems to be losing hold a little bit of sort of the Republican line on this one, and I think it's exceptional that we saw so many leaders across the aisle stand up and say, you know, this is unacceptable. And Florida, you know, we claim so much of our natural beauty. And so to kind of throw this plan in the face of that and design these programs that, like you said, have no public input, and we're essentially, you know, trying to sneak in. I think it's an absolute travesty, and I was glad to see the outcry against it. And I say that coming from a family that's big into pickleball and disc golf. So, so I'm definitely familiar. I think that in the legislature, it is so critical to have clear checks and balances. I think that's the beauty of American democracy and democracy at the state level, is that we should have a legislature that feels comfortable checking our governor and saying, you know, that's not acceptable. That's not gonna fly by us. And that's frankly one of my largest concerns with our current legislature. There's so little opportunity for debate. There's so little opportunity for compromise and for nuance, because what has happened over the last 30 years as the Republican Party continues to consolidate power and build these supermajorities, what we see is a legislature that rubber stamps one person's perspective of the issues. And I just don't think that works for anybody. I think we deserve legislators and a democracy who are willing to fight about these policy issues and say, you know, we believe in the same thing. We want life to be better for our communities, but we disagree about how to get there. And let's debate about that. I think that's what we're entitled to. I think that's what democracy is built on. And I think that's what we need more of in the legislature to check both this issue and so many others.
Thank you. I wanted to move on and talk about a couple of proposed constitutional amendments. I know you've already discussed Amendment 3, talking about marijuana, but I wanted to see if you could focus on Amendment 4 and share your view. And Amendment 4 meant to protect reproductive rights, including abortion access for Florida women. If it passes, do you anticipate further attacks on reproductive freedom from the legislature?
So first of all, my dog is having a bit of a fit about the FedEx truck outside, so I apologize to y'all and future listeners, but such is the work from home life. The Amendment 4, I unequivocally support the amendment, and I will be voting yes. I think what we see in Florida right now is women who who are being forced to flee the state to access comprehensive reproductive health care, and it's a travesty. It's heartbreaking to see the stories of women who aren't able to access care. And for me, you know, someone who is thinking about having a family and what that looks like for me, to feel like I may not be able to access high quality care because in states with abortion bans, doctors, even those who do not perform abortions, are more likely to leave the state and practice in another community. And so I think there's a lot of, you know, repercussions. If Amendment 4 passes, I do believe that the legislature will continue to attack reproductive rights as part of that implementation process. And that's why it's so critical that we don't just pass Amendment 4, but we elect pro-choice legislators who are willing to listen to the voice of the people and say, we are going to implement the amendment that people voted for, and we're going to execute their desires, and we're not going to interfere.
Thank you for that answer. You also cite affordable housing as a top priority. What's your opinion of the Live Local Act, the biggest piece of legislation that's meant to address the lack of affordable housing in Florida? How do you feel about that piece of legislation?
Yeah, I'm happy that the legislature worked on that issue. And I know that there was a lot of bipartisan support for many pieces of it, which I think is excellent. But I don't think it did enough. I think this is a continued conversation. No one piece of legislation is going to solve an issue with as many causes as we could sit here and list for the rest of our allotted time together. And so I would want to continue exploring further options that push past, you know, developer incentives and look at what communities need. And I think there's a lot to say around the impact of local rule and home rule on some of these issues. The needs of affordable housing in Seminole County differ from the needs for affordable housing in Orange County, and we're neighbors, let alone the differences between, Leon and Miami-Dade. And so while I think the state acting is a great first step, we need to look at local solutions, and we need to continue to have this conversation in the legislature, because clearly we hear constantly as we knock on doors that this wasn't enough. There has to be continued solutions.
Well, once again, you set me up perfectly, because another major piece of the housing puzzle right now, more than ever it ever has been before, is the fact that Floridians are paying much more, and in many cases getting much less from their property insurance policies. Lawmakers have been dragged back to Tallahassee to fix it, but there has never really been a fix. What would you suggest would be the best plan for rescuing Florida's property insurance market?
Yeah, I want to point to a bill that Representatives Hillary Cassell, and Representative Spencer Roach introduced last session that made it to a workshop, but did not make it to the full floor for debate, that would have essentially changed how citizens manages their property insurance coverage. And you'll have to forgive me for getting a little bit wonky here, but essentially the idea of changing citizens to cover wind damage so that it is an insurer of first resort for specific wind coverage, which is, as we know, the highest risk category for insurance providers. It is, and just now we're just talking about what is the incoming hurricane going to look like? What level of winds are we going to get to in Seminole County? How are we going to handle that? What's the wind damage going to look like? This is an incalculable risk. And I appreciate the position that insurance companies are in, trying to cover that kind of amount. And so by changing this system, by asking citizens, having citizens cover that incalculable portion, you all of a sudden create an actual competitive free market environment for insurance companies where there is a calculable risk and they are asked to participate in a free market and ideally drive prices down to support policyholders and really mitigate some of those extreme costs. I really encourage folks to look into that piece of legislation that Representatives Cassell and Roach introduced, because I do think it is really an exceptionally creative and obviously bipartisan idea to address some of these issues. And look, that's what we're going to have to go for, is creative bipartisan options. Insurance providers don't look at the letter after your name before they jack up your rates. And I'm a victim too. We're seeing our premiums skyrocket. And so we can't look at the letter after someone's name when we're talking about solutions either. It has to be something that we come to together and we look at our options and say, what is going to help people and individuals in our community, not what's going to add to our insurance provider's bottom line.
Thank you. And that actually takes us right into the last question we really had for you. And I apologize for going over time, and we have so many other things that we could talk about, certainly. But a lot of the questions that we've asked you had to do with what you would do in a world where you had the decisive ability to make something happen. The reality is, as you say, Democrats are seriously outnumbered in both chambers of the legislature, and they may retake some seats, but it is numerically unlikely that they will regain control of either the House or the Senate. Should you be the one representing District 38, which is considered to be a flippable district in 2025, what would you do to make sure that your constituents' viewpoints are represented? Because that's going to be something that's on their mind when they go to vote.
Yeah, absolutely hear you. And that's such a significant concern. And you're right. We could sit here for the next 6 hours and talk about every issue that every voter has brought up on the doors over the last year we've been knocking. When it comes to how we're going to advocate for our communities, First of all, on November 6th, I don't plan on being in a super minority. And I think that changes how the conversations in the legislature, especially at the committee level, are handled, because so many of these bills, when they come to the floor for final readings, they've been amended through committee. And with Democrats out of the super minority, with Democrats having a significant role in a lot of these committees that would change with the flip of this seat and a couple of others around the state, then we're able to start amending, to start adding language, to start working on legislation that is designed to help people. I think 30 years of single party rule, it doesn't work for anyone. What we've seen is that legislation comes to the floor, there's no debate, there's no compromise, there's no negotiation. And so, like we said earlier, you end up with exactly one point of view, either the governor or whoever wrote that legislation, which in many cases, it's lobbyists or special interests who have a benefit from that legislation. And so I just don't think that this kind of governing works. With Democrats out of the super minority, we have the ability to start debating. And I think that's what our communities need. Frankly, I think that's what our communities deserve, is legislators who show up, who have hard conversations with people they may not agree with, and who work to find an answer that is better for everyone. To me, I come from a very red community. I've been a Democrat as long as I've known my own values, and so I'm not unfamiliar with being in a minority viewpoint position. I think at the end of the day, the conversation is, do we have the same goal? And in many of these cases, we do. Our goal is to make life better tomorrow than it was today, and better today than it was yesterday. And for me, as long as someone else shares that goal, I'm happy to debate with them all day long about how to get there. And I think those conversations are worthwhile. And I think those conversations are what our communities, our constituents are entitled to.
Thank you very much. I definitely agree. We've got so much more that we need to talk about, but we do promise to keep these videos short enough for our readers. But before we go to your closing statement, I wanted to remind the people who are watching this video that the Sentinel will be making a recommendation in this race, but we don't expect you to just take our word for it. We urge you to take a look at both candidates in this race, in addition to our excellent news coverage. There will be other opportunities to see these candidates, or possibly, one or the other of them, at public forums. Both of them have websites and social media presences, and we've given you those URLs. So check both of these candidates out, see who best represents your own values and your needs as a voter in Seminole County. And most importantly, remember that November 5th is the date. You do have to register within the next week or so if you want to vote in that race. But and you will also need to request an absentee ballot if you haven't done so in the last couple of years, if you want to vote by mail. So with that, we would like to ask you to make a closing statement as to why voters should choose you for the seat.
Fantastic. Thank you. Yeah, excellent points. You can request a vote by mail ballot up through October 24th, and then early voting is from October 21st to November 3rd. And for most of District 38, the closest early voting location is going to be the Castleberry Library on Oxford. And I do believe that we have a misconception as Americans and as Floridians that our politicians are somehow distant or absent or abstract or othered. And that's why we've knocked on so many doors. That's why we've communicated with so many voters, because our politicians should be our neighbors. Our politicians should be someone who we can call, someone who we can hold accountable, someone who we can email or reach out to and know that they will hear our concerns and listen. I'm Sarah Henry. I'm running for Florida House District 38, and I believe those things, which is why I try to be as accessible as possible to voters. If you have a question, if you don't see something on my website and you want to know where I stand, if you have a concern that we haven't addressed in this conversation, please reach out. I answer all of my own Facebook and Twitter DMs, which many people find hard to believe, but it's true. So please shoot me a message. Please send me an email at vote@sarah4fl.com, because I want to hear from you about the issues that matter most, about what you need from your legislators. And I can absolutely promise that while we may not agree on how to get there, I know that we are all working for a Seminole County that is better for each of us, a Seminole County where we can all be safe, healthy, and prosperous. And I will never stop fighting for that world.
Thank you so much. And we wish you the best of luck, and we look forward to seeing what the election brings.